Yeah, don't miss that opportunity.
Fantastic.
Let's talk now to the journalist and author Ross Clark, who joins us. Ross, morning to you. Can we kick off with the Chancellor yesterday? Because, I mean, we heard a lot from him, but what we didn't hear was how he's going to balance the books.
No, exactly. I mean, he's proposing to tell us that later this month sometime. He announces fiscal plans. But, I mean, markets are not interested in whether it's fair or unfair for wealthy people to pay 45% tax. That's Labour's obsession. It's Michael Gove's obsession. But what markets are concerned about is whether Britain has sustainable fiscal plans, whether, in the long term we can balance the books, we can match revenue with income. No UK government has managed this now in 20 years, and every year we go by with a deficit, we pile more on debt, and we have to persuade investors to buy that debt, and it becomes ever more difficult when you have a government that's spending vastly more than it's receiving in revenue. So, I mean, that was a big thing missing from Kwasi Kwarteng's speech yesterday is, what does he think on this? You remember, go back 12 years when the coalition was formed. Cameron and Osborne were leading a fiscal policy then, and balancing the books, that was the obsession. That was they mentioned at every occasion. Every budget was supposedly designed to work towards that, eliminating the deficit. Now the government's just not sort of talking about this at all, and it just can't go on because as we've seen over the past week, investors lose patience. They demand ever higher rates of interest to lend money to the UK government, and the pound sinks, and we end up with all kinds of economic turmoil, including for homeowners not being able to get mortgages and so on. And at some point, we're going to have these fiscal plans, and it's a shame that there was nothing in it in yesterday's speech.
Well, it's interesting, the Chancellor saying, we get it. I mean, do you think he does get it? No more distractions. And yet, as you say, this probably won't draw a line under it, not least because there's around 40 billion in tax cuts that they want to make that are still unfunded. Lots of questions about whether that means austerity and public spending cuts.
Well, yes, exactly. I mean, Kwasi Kwarteng yesterday, he addressed, if you like, the sort of political problems, the optics of this 45% to 40% tax reduction were appalling. But yes, he has not addressed the wider economic issues which are infecting global markets. And until he does so, there will be problems in global markets. I remember only 3 years ago, the Conservatives won an 80-seat majority, partly because the public had been persuaded that Jeremy Corbyn's tax and spending plans were thoroughly irresponsible. Corbyn at the time was suggesting extra £80 billion in public spending, and people worried, well, where's he going to get this money from? The Conservatives under Boris Johnson were very triumphant in persuading that the public that the Corbyn's spending plans were irresponsible, and yet here we are now with a Conservative government with an even more irresponsible tax and spending package, if you like.
So where does that leave the other big sort of departments? I mean, we're going to hear from Therese Coffey, the Deputy Prime Minister and Health Secretary, today. I mean, it's going to be a case, is it? She's not going to be able to spend more, announce spending more. She's going to have to spend better somehow in the health service.
Well, not only that. I mean, some of the NHS budget is designed to disappear next year because, if you remember, we had this national insurance rise proposed by Rishi Sunak in the spring. Well, that has now gone. That money was, for a year, it was going to go to the NHS, and then it was going to go into social care after that. And that leaves a bit of a hole, really, in the NHS budget. And originally the idea was that we were going to, a huge spending increase for a few months. That would help reduce the waiting lists, and then we'd be able to go back to sort of normal. Well, that's not really happening. The waiting lists are still agonisingly long. This is a hangover from COVID. If you remember, sort of the NHS, large parts of it appeared to shut down, or that's how the public saw it. In order to deal with COVID, the people weren't seeking medical attention at the time. And the result of that now is that there's a huge backlog in people seeking attention for medical conditions which need looking at, and where is the NHS capacity to help reduce these what Theresa Coffey is going to propose, I understand, is that she's going to bring in more foreign nurses and so on. Well, the government's actually been very successful in attracting foreign nurses and doctors. There's been a huge increase since Brexit. Ironically, we were told that Brexit was going to destroy the ability of the NHS to employ foreign workers. Well, the opposite's happened. But even so, we still have this huge backlog. Demand grows year by year, partly because of expectations, partly because we've got an ageing population, and it is a real struggle for the government's budget, NHS budget, to keep up with it.
Well, a long list of challenges. Ross Clark, good to get your analysis this morning. Thanks very much for joining us.